Hey guys, my name's Yvette and welcome to my DIY channel, and I hope that you guys are having a great day. So for today's video, I'm going to be testing out 5 air dry clays, and about a year ago I made a video just like this where I tested out another 5 air dry clays, and in that video I tested out Daz, Creative, Amico, Jovi, and Crayola. And I'll link that video down in the description box if you guys want to check that out. But in this video, I'm going to be testing out Activa, Craftsmart, Sculpey, Mont Marte, and Pepy. And I'm also going to be testing out these clays the same way that I tested out the other clays, just so that you guys can compare and contrast the clays if you need to see which ones will work best for you. And I also want to mention that none of these clays in this video are sponsored, and in the other video I forgot to say that none of those clays were sponsored at all, so this is just like my honest opinion. But yeah guys, let's just get started. Okay guys, before we really get into the video, we're going to start out with around how much each clay should cost and where to buy it. The first clay I'm going to test out is Activa Supreme. This comes in a package that weighs 2.2 pounds and it should cost around $12.99 to $14.95. You can purchase this through Amazon or on their official website, and make sure that it's the Supreme because they do have a couple of other clays that they sell. The second clay we're going to test out is Sculpey's air dry clay. This comes in a package of 2.2 pounds and it should cost around $10.99 to $11.99, and you can find this on their official website or at Michael's. The third clay we're going to test out is Craftsmart air dry clay, and this comes in a package of 10 pounds. This should cost anywhere from $14.99 all the way up to $25.23, and you can find this clay either on Amazon or at Michael's. The fourth clay we're going to check out is Mont Marte modeling clay, and this comes in a package of 1.1 pounds and it costs around $7.99, and you should be able to find this on Amazon. And last but not least, we're going to check out Pepe modeling clay, and this comes in a package of 2.2 pounds, and you could mostly find this one on Amazon and it should cost around $12.95. And if you're trying to break this down like by pound to see which one is the most expensive clay, Mont Marte would be the most expensive one, and then the most affordable one would be Craftsmart. Okay guys, so all of these are air dry clays. You don't have to bake them in the oven at all for them to dry. Pepe, Sculpey, and Mont Marte are all modeling clays, and then Craftsmart and Activa are both natural clays, which means that they are earth-based. We're going to start out by testing Activa Supreme air dry clay. When you first start touching this clay, this feels like a classic earth-based clay. It's definitely a little dense, but once you start kneading it, it loosens up a lot and it's super easy to work with. This clay blends into itself so nicely. It does feel a little sticky, but nothing too intense. If you add water to it, just make sure to go light on the water because it could get a little messy. And then this clay has a very, very mild scent. Like, you actually have to sniff it really close to get like a smell from it. So now we're going to see how well this clay rolls out by itself. I'm going to be using a glass bottle to do this. I don't like to use rolling pins for some reason. I also know that you can like add powders to your clays to make them easier to roll out, but we're just going to be doing the clay by themselves just to see how they do. So at first, this clay did want to stick to the bottle a little bit, but once you really get into rolling it out more, it does a lot better. So I'd say it's pretty good. Next, I'm going to take this little container and I'm going to wrap the clay around it, and we're going to let this guy dry to see if the clay will crack up against this once it's dry. I'm going to stamp the letter A on this so that I know it's for this clay, and I'm just going to set this guy to the side to dry. Right here, I'm making my little circle for the drop tests, and you guys see the little sticks on the side? That's just going to make sure that this is 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I'm also making these little circles because I want to see how flat the clays dry or if they like warp. So I'm going to use this little circle thingy to cut out my circle, and this is 3 inches in diameter. Before I set this to dry, I'm going to see how well this clay stamps, and as you guys can see, this clay stamps really well. It took all the little details from the mushroom. And so now let's say that I didn't mean to stamp this right here, so I'm going to blend this away with my finger to see how well this will blend itself away. And it went away pretty well, but with a little bit of water, this will definitely go away even more. So this clay would be nice to use if you make mistakes. Okay, so now I'm going to stamp this with the letter A so that I remember this is the Activa clay, and I'm going to set that to the side to dry. Okay guys, so I wanted to see how well these clays would do in molds, and so I'm going to be using this little flower mold to test out the clay. For all of the clays I test out, I'm going to be putting them in the same mold that you guys see right here. And I know that you can use cornstarch to help clays and molds, but I'm not going to do that because I want to test out how the clays will do by themselves. But what I am going to do is test out the mold twice for each clay. So for the first round, I'm going to put the clay into the mold, and then I'm going to put all of that into the refrigerator for 30 minutes because the directions on the mold said that that would help air dry clay. And then for the second round, I'm going to put the clay into the mold and then take out the clay immediately and see how well that works. Okay guys, so it's been 30 minutes, so now we're going to take out the clay. This peeled off super easily, and it did have all the little details of the flower and the clay. So now I'm going to do the same test, but without putting the clay in the fridge. It was a little harder to take out the clay this time because it did kind of want to stick to the mold a little bit, and the flower didn't get as many details as it did with the clay that was in the fridge for the 30 minutes. So now I'm just going to set these to the side to dry, and we'll see how they turned out. Okay guys, so now we're going to move on to our second clay, and we're going to be testing out Sculpey air dry clay. When you first start out with this one, it feels dense at first for like a second, and then once you start kneading it, it turns into like a light, airy clay. It blends into itself pretty well, and if you pull it apart, you can kind of see the little fibers of the clay. This one kind of feels like in between a paper clay and like a very extremely soft polymer clay. And this one does not feel sticky at all. It also barely has a scent to it. This Sculpey clay was so easy to roll out. Now I'm going to cover the little cup to see if this will crack. So Sculpey is going to be stamped with a letter B. Now I'm going to make the little drop test circle. Okay, so now I'm going to test out how well this stamps. For this clay, you're going to want to add a little bit of pressure to really get all of the little details in there. As you can see, not all of them appeared that well. And then let's blend away the little mushroom, and it went away pretty well. What stayed the most was like the actual outline of the mushroom, so this may not be the best clay if you make like a lot of tiny dings in your projects. So now I'm going to stamp this with the letter B and set this aside for it to dry. And now let's move on to the molds. Okay, so here she is after 30 minutes, and this one was so easy to pop out, and the clay really took in all of the little details of the flower. So this did great in the mold. Now I'm going to test out the clay without putting it in the fridge. This was also really easy to pop out, and it didn't stick at all. It got most of the little details of the flower, almost as good as the one that I had put in the fridge. So now I'm going to let these dry. Moving on to our third clay, which is Craft Smart Natural Clay. This one also feels like your classic earth-based air dry clay. This one does feel dense when you first grab it, and then as you start kneading it, it does stay dense, but it's not like a rock hard clay. And then this clay does get semi-sticky, so if you use water to blend out your clay like I do, just make sure to be careful with it because this could get pretty messy. Also, this one does have like a clay smell to it. It's not like a subtle scent. So as you guys can see, as I rolled out this clay, it did want to stick to the bottle, but it's not that bad. I've definitely worked with worse. Now I'm going to cover our little cup to see if this will crack, and I'm going to stamp this with the letter C. Next, I'm going to make our drop test circle. Now I'm going to test out how well this stamps. And look at that, guys, all of the little details showed up. Oh, I really liked that. This stamps really nicely. And then the little mushroom blended away really well, so this clay would be really good if you make mistakes in your projects. I'm going to stamp this with the letter C, and then I'm going to let this dry. Moving on to the molds. So this one was pretty easy to pop out. Not all of the little details of the flower appeared, but it's still pretty good. So here's the clay without putting it in the fridge, and this one did want to stick to the mold a little bit. A lot of the details didn't quite show up on this one, and because it's stuck to the mold a little bit, it does look messier. So yeah, now I'm just going to let these guys dry. Next, I'm going to be testing out Mont Marte modeling clay. So the very first thing I noticed about this clay was how sticky it was. It does feel semi-light, it blends into itself very easily, and this does have a very mild scent to it. So I found this clay difficult to work with just because of how sticky it was. When I rolled out this clay, it really stuck to the glass bottle and I was getting pretty frustrated with it. I thought about adding some flour to help it, but then I was like, oh, it wouldn't be fair against the other clays because I didn't do that with them, so I just didn't do it. I mean, look at my hands, and I haven't even added any water to the clay, so you can see how messy of a clay this is. And I don't mind messy clays, but this one was like extreme. So this was as good as I got the clay to roll out. I did have to let the clay sit out for like 15 minutes before I started rolling it out again to get this, and this still doesn't look that good. Anyways, let's cover up the little cup. Okay, so I blended this out with some water to make it nice and neat. Now I'm going to stamp this with the letter D from Mont Marte, and I'm going to let this dry. Now I'm going to make my little drop test circle, and you guys see the clay was a lot easier to roll out now because I did leave this out for another 15 minutes before I rolled it out. Getting the circle off the mat was really hard because it really wanted to stick to the mat. It did make the circle a little bit wonky, so if you guys wonder why it's kind of like weird looking, that's why. Now I'm going to check to see how well this stamps. And the clay really wanted to stick to the stamp, and it wasn't the best for stamping. I mean, it did get like the really big details, but yeah, I just wouldn't use this if you're trying to like engrave something into the clay. I'm going to blend the mushroom away and see if it reappears once this is dry. And then I'm going to stamp this with the letter D, and I'm going to set this to the side to dry. Now it's time to check to see how well this works with the mold. This was kind of hard to get out. It really wanted to stick to the mold, and when it came out really messy. So here's my attempt to get out the clay that was not refrigerated, and it just wasn't working. The clay was way too sticky for this. So yeah, that was a no-go. Lastly, we're going to be testing out Pepe air dry modeling clay. So this clay feels like a paper-based clay. It feels like it blends into itself nicely. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Daz paper clay, and this clay is on the lighter side. I will say though, this clay has a very, very strong scent to it. I'm not somebody who is like sensitive to smells, but I actually had to end up putting on a face mask to work with this because it was giving me a headache. So if you're sensitive to smells, keep that in mind. And then this clay rolled out so nicely. I really loved that. Now I'm going to cover up the little cup to see if this cracks, and then I'm going to stamp this with the letter E so that I remember this is Pepe. Next, I'm going to make my little drop test circle. Okay, so this clay stamped super nicely. I really like that, but then it was really hard to get rid of like the mushroom. You can see it's still pretty much there, but yeah, now I'm just gonna stamp this with the letter E and let this dry. Moving on to the clay mold test. And it was pretty easy to pop out. It didn't get like the best details of the flower, but it did okay. And I totally forgot to record taking out the one that wasn't in the fridge, but I did write down my notes of it, and I wrote that it was a little bit sticky, so it made it harder to take out the clay. And then you guys can see that like not all the little flower details got on this clay. So yeah, now I'm just gonna let these dry. Okay guys, so now let's move on to some results. We're going to start out by ranking the clay's stickiness. I find clays that are not so sticky a little bit easier to work with, but then again, it actually kind of depends on the project because at times you may want sticky clay. So the least sticky clays are Sculpey air dry clay and Pepe air dry. And then the ones that are still pretty good to work with are Activa Supreme and Craft Smart. These ones do have a bit of stickiness, but it's like a good stickiness to them, you know? And then the worst one was Mont Marte. This one was just so sticky. It kind of felt like I had glue on my hands, and it just made this clay like way too difficult to work with. So I checked out a couple of Mont Marte reviews after I worked with this clay just to see if I had gotten like a bad batch or something. But a lot of people were saying that it was really sticky and difficult to work with, so I was just like, oh, okay, it wasn't just me then. Okay, so now we're going to move on to clays that were the best for getting rid of deeper than surface scratches. So like, let's say you're deep in your clay project and you like make a big mistake in it and you're trying to blend it out and hopefully it doesn't reappear. So the best clay to get rid of the mistakes in your projects without restarting are Activa Supreme and Craft Smart. The mushrooms that I pressed into those clays went away really well, and I'll show you guys the end result in a bit. And then the ones that really kept that mushroom shape that we put in there were Sculpey, Pepe, and Mont Marte. So if you want to look at the bright side, that means that if you're sculpting and you want your clay to keep all of like the little details in there and stuff, Sculpey, Pepe, and Mont Marte would be the best clays to use. Okay guys, now we're going to look at the results of how the little flowers dried. So the top row are the clays that were in the fridge for 30 minutes, and then the bottom row are the clays without being in the fridge. And as you guys can see, the clays that were in the fridge for 30 minutes did a lot better than the clays when they weren't in the fridge. So now I'm going to show you guys a closer look. Craft Smart did dry with some cracks. And then Pepe also dried with some cracks. So if you wanted a good clay to use for molds, I would say go with either Sculpey or Activa. Those two ended up doing the best, and then Sculpey did great without even putting it in the fridge. So yeah, my first choice would be Sculpey, and then I would go with Activa, and then stay away from Mont Marte and Craft Smart and Pepe. They did okay. Okay guys, so now we're going to see which clays cracked up against the little cup, and I find this super important because I like to use my clays to dry up against glass or plastic, and I need to know which ones are going to crack or not. 3 out of the 5 clays ended up cracking. Activa cracked, Sculpey was fine, Craft Smart cracked, Mont Marte cracked, and Pepe was fine. I'm going to show you guys a closer look. So Sculpey and Peppy would be great to use if you wanted to dry these up against something because they didn't crack at all. And then Activa, Craftsmart, and Mont Marte all cracked. Craftsmart cracked the worst and Mont Marte had minimal cracking. Okay guys, so now we're going to go on to the results to see which clays dried flatly or which ones warped, and then to see if like the mushrooms reappeared a lot on the clays after I blended them out. So here they are, and from the top they all look pretty good. From the side view, you can definitely see a little warping on some of the clays, and to dry them, all I did was lay them on top of this table, and I just put some saran wrap under them so that they wouldn't stick to the table, but I didn't do anything to like try to prevent the warping. I just wanted to see how they would dry by themselves. Sculpey and Peppy were the ones that warped the most, so let me give you guys a wiggle test. And then Activa, Craftsmart, and Mont Marte dried the flattest. I mean, they had the tiniest bit of warping, but like barely. And here's their wiggle test. Now I'm going to weigh the clays for you guys to see which clays are heavier and which ones are lighter. And I do this because for some projects, some people are looking for a heavier clay, and for other projects they want a lighter clay. And keep in mind, these were all cut to be the same size. They're all 1/4 of an inch thick and all 3 inches in diameter. Activa weighs 40 grams, Sculpey weighs 33 grams, Craftsmart weighs 39 grams, Mont Marte weighs 32 grams, and Pepe weighs 29 grams. Alright guys, so moving on to the drop test, I'm going to start out by dropping them from a standard desk height, which is 2.5 feet, and I'm going to drop the clays onto carpet, wood floor, and tile, and if they survive that, I'll drop them from 5 feet up onto the carpet, wood floor, and tile. So let's see which ones make it.
Welcome! Happy Hunger Games! And may the odds be ever in your favor.
Round 1. Fight!
Okay guys, so we're going to start with A. So that one is good. Moving on to B for Sculpey. That one's good. Okay, so C is Craftsmart. She's good. D is for Mont Marte. That's good. E is for Peppy. Oh. Leo. And that is good.
Round 2. Fight!
A. It's good. B. It's good. C. Okay, so this one broke and I was not expecting that. D. Okay, it's still good. No, it's still good. Okay guys, so Craftsmart was the first to go and I was definitely not expecting that. I was hoping that it would have made it at least to like the tile drop test, but it is what it is. This clay breaks easily, which I personally find as like a big flaw because, you know, sometimes your projects get like moved or dinged a bit and you don't want to worry about them breaking so easily.
Round 3. Fight!
A. Still good. B. Still good. D. Still good. And E. Still good. You guys, I'm super impressed that they all made it past these rounds besides Craft Smart, so let's move on to the 5 feet.
Round 1. Fight!
Still good. 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 Good.
Round 2. Fight!
Oh, I'm scared. Okay. A. That is still good. Okay, this one's B. That is still good. This one is D. Good.
Round 3. Fight!
A. No, wow, it made it. Okay, B. I'm scared. Okay, B. Still good. This one is D. Still good. Last but not least, E. So it just cracked right here. Wow, guys, they all made it even after the tile test. Pepe was the only one that got a little bit of a ding on the clay, but it's not like bad at all. Guys, I actually can't believe that they all made it past all of these rounds. I'm like so impressed. So you know what? I'm gonna do a concrete drop test. Okay guys, this concrete is like on the smoother side, and then we have some that has like little rocks in it. So we're gonna do both.
Round 1. Fight!
Okay guys, so A from 3 feet. Oh my gosh, it made it. B from 3 feet. D. And E. Made it.
Round 2. Fight!
A. Oh, I'm scared. It's good. B. It's good. E. Just tripped a little bit. D. Wow.
Round 1. Fight!
We have A. Okay, you made it. B. Wow. Okay, so D. Oh, wow. Made it. Okay, E. Oh. Okay. Okay guys, so Pepe was the only one to break on the concrete, and I've dropped all of these clays multiple times, so I'd say that these clays are very strong except for Craftsmart. I'm actually super impressed. And look, Pepe didn't even break as bad as Craftsmart did, and that was dropped on concrete. And look how good Activa and Sculpey still look. Mont Marte, she was always just looking kind of rough, but she made it. Okay guys, so on to the final results. Should you spend your hard-earned dollars on these clays or not? I'm going to rank these from yes, buy them, these are worth your money and you'll be super happy with them. Then wouldn't hurt to try out. So these clays didn't do the best or the worst in the clay tests. They were in the middle, and who knows, you might actually like them more than I did. And yeah, these are solid. And then the last category is don't waste your money. You're probably not going to like it. Okay, so the best air dry clay in my opinion was Sculpey. This was very easy to work with. It wasn't overly sticky. It blended out great. It did great in the molds, and it didn't crack when it dried up against the little cup, and it survived the drop tests. I would say that the only real flaw with this clay was that it warped when it dried, so it didn't like dry completely flat. And there are stuff that you can do to help with the drying, so this wasn't a big deal for me. I would definitely buy this clay over and over again. It's one of my new favorites, and I was actually really surprised that I liked this clay so much. Another great clay was Activa Supreme Air Dry Clay. This is just a great earth-based clay. I've been looking for something like this for a long time. So this one was super easy to work with. It blended out beautifully. It worked great with the molds. It's really good for using stamps to engrave stuff into the clay, and it blended out mistakes really well, and it dried flatly. It also survived the drop test, and then the biggest flaw with this one was that it cracked up against the little cup. So I wouldn't use this if I needed this to dry up against something, but I would definitely use this for other projects, and I'll definitely be buying this clay over and over again because I really liked it. So in the wouldn't hurt to try out category, the first one I'm going to put in there is Pepe. It's a solid clay, it's easy to work with, great with stamps, which is good for engraving, good for sculpting. It didn't crack against the little cup, but it's not the best for molds because it's a little bit on the sticky side, and then it did warp when it dried, so it didn't dry flat. And then this one also has like a really strong scent to it. And then it did break on the drop test, but it did survive for a long time on the drop tests. So this is still a strong clay. But for me personally, I probably won't buy this clay again just because I've tried out other clays that are better, and I just wouldn't want to spend my money on this. But who knows, if you ever decide to try this out, you might like it more than me. The other clay that I'm going to put in this category is Craftsmart. So this clay is really easy to work with. It blends together nicely. It stamps nicely. It's good to get rid of mistakes, and it dried flatly, but it cracked up against the cup a lot, and it broke super fast on the drop test. And it didn't do great with the molds. So for me personally, I wouldn't buy this clay again just because of how easily it breaks. Because then I'll always like worry about like having to be super careful with it. This one actually reminds me a lot of Amico air dry clay if you guys have ever tried that out. And the only clay in the don't waste your money category is Mont Marte. I just wouldn't buy this. It's too difficult to work with, and if I'm buying a clay, I want to be able to just use it instead of becoming like really frustrated with it. It did crack a little bit up against the cup, and it's not good for molds, but it did dry flatly and it did survive the drop tests. But I just don't know, because of how difficult it was to work with, I just wouldn't recommend this at all. And like I said before, I did go and read some reviews to see what other people thought of this or what their experiences were with this clay. And a lot of them had the same experience that I did, that it was just too difficult to work with. But then some people actually really did like this clay. So I don't know if this is like a hit or miss type of clay, like some batches are good and some are bad, or how the people who liked this clay are using it. I just wouldn't recommend this to somebody. So I would say buyer beware. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any other questions. And I also make a bunch of air dry clay DIY videos on my channel, along with a bunch of like other random DIY videos. So subscribe if you want to see some of those. But yeah guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!